Let's bring in CoinDesk Global Policy and Regulation Managing Editor Nick Day, who's also the editor of CoinDesk The State of Crypto newsletter. Good morning, Nick. So you had a chance to have a listen to the hearings today. I wanted to hear some of your main takeaways.
Hey, yeah, good morning. Definitely an interesting hearing. This was not the longest congressional hearing we've had on crypto. It clocked in at just under 5 hours. Yeah, so fairly long, but not quite as long as the Libra hearings. But I think the real interesting kind of aspect that stood out was pretty much every lawmaker asked some substantive questions about what they wanted to know in regards to crypto policy. We had questions about the technical specifics of how to do certain things. We had questions about whether certain policy maneuvers might make sense. So you had lawmakers actively soliciting feedback from these CEOs about whether they should mandate things like federal oversight of stablecoin asset reserve reporting.
On that note, we have sought from Jeremy Allaire, CEO of Circle, talking about the digital dollar as well as stablecoins. Let's have a listen.
Will the United States support the dollar and digital dollars in the form of stablecoins because they're in the market and operational today to help the United States dollar be the competitive currency of the internet? I think that's the opportunity. I think it's in front of us right now. And it's one of the reasons why we're so focused on this as a national economic, and not just a national economic priority, a national security priority, because clearly, if this is the new infrastructure, economic infrastructure of the internet, we want the dollar to play a critical and strategic role. And partnering closely with private companies and using open internet technologies becomes a way for the United States to compete versus states that are seeking to nationalize that infrastructure, operate it themselves in a surveillance-oriented model.
Right. So the hearing was, to me, very exploratory, productive, and educational. And some of that context that Jeremy Allaire alluded to was, introducing the potential of a digital dollar stablecoin regulation is very much on the minds of Congress. And I don't know what you may have gotten out of that, Nick.
Yeah, there definitely is a view towards regulation. I don't know if we have anything specific coming out yet. Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey said that he was actually working on a bill based on the President Working Group's report on stablecoins. And one of his questions was about the kind of different ways to implement those recommendations, which specifically trying to figure out how to get banks to oversee stablecoin issuance, or whether to have a bank regulator oversee these issuers, whether through a charter or through some other kind of license and registration system. So it does feel like regulation is on the way, but not soon.
Along those lines, we had Sam Bankman-Fried also went in front of Congress to talk about stablecoins. He's one of the biggest consumers of stablecoins out there. So it's sort of almost as if you're asking Snoop Dogg about cannabis regulation. So let's have a listen about.
Within this framework, can you identify the single most important thing that Congress could do right now to regulate stablecoins in order to persist dollar dominance?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think the single biggest thing is just ensure the reserves are what they say they are. That is the fundamental large portion of the risk that could be posed by them is from both a consumer protection and a systemic risk perspective is what if there is $1 trillion stablecoin with only $1 billion actually backing it. And so I think having daily attestations and periodic third-party audits to confirm that the stablecoins are backed one-to-one with regulatory oversight of that process is by far the single most important piece of that.
So, I mean, that basically, he's one of the biggest customers, if not the biggest customer of Tether. I mean, he could ask them directly, hey, guys, why don't you publish an audit? But here he's going in front of regulators, asking them or telling them that's what's needed. What's going on here? Is he serious, or is he just sort of is this for the cameras?
Well, I think he was answering the question he was given by the lawmakers for sure. This is, the hearing was about where the regulations might come from. And, whatever he is asking or isn't asking Tether, I'm assuming that will probably end up staying between them. But at least, as far as this public hearing is concerned, yeah, that is the way he's coming at this, is to talk to the policymakers about what they want.
One of the more interesting back and forths happened because at least one congressman was not happy with who showed up. Speaking of Tether, with who showed up and maybe who didn't show up. Brad Sherman. Let's have a listen to that. I think we have that queued here.
Zuckerberg had to come here himself and sit there. Brian Armstrong sent his number 2. And Tether doesn't bother to show up at all.
Well, I mean, I guess it's really hard. Why would you leave if you have a beautiful house in the Bahamas next to the guy who made Inspector Gadget? Why would you go to Congress? What's that about?
I mean, all these companies do want to conduct business in the U.S. and they want to do it in such a way that they're not going to have the SEC or the DOJ knocking on their doors in a couple of years, or even the CFTC with regard to derivatives in particular. So it's definitely in these CEOs' best interest to work with regulators and lawmakers on the policies that will eventually be implemented. And yesterday I think was just a substantive step there.
Well, it's not a good look on cryptocurrency companies not to show up, not to be transparent. And I think that was Brad Sherman's point on this. Why send your number 2? You should send your number 1, Brian Armstrong.
Right.
Tether not showing up at all. He also complained about the fees on Coinbase, saying, if you put $100 in Coinbase, you get knocked down about $6. You get $94 back or something like that. So there were some criticisms lobbed in the hearing for sure.
Yeah, I mean there was a strong undercurrent of consumer protection running throughout the hearing, and you heard that from a lot of the lawmakers. It wasn't just the Democrats; it was pretty across the board. There was a lot of concern about making sure that the investors who are getting into crypto aren't going to lose out, like you just said, Christine.
Was this a miscalculation on the part, at least, of Brian Armstrong, who, remember Coinbase is a U.S.-based company, and they also have presence in most of the states in the U.S. and what have you, and they're regulated by all these entities. Is it a miscalculation, or was that on purpose? Do they think he maybe doesn't know how to answer a question properly?
I mean, I think what I don't know is how exactly the hearing came together. So, I think my first question is who was invited? Was Brian Armstrong invited? Was Elisa Haas invited from the beginning? Because a lot of these hearings, the witnesses that show up are usually negotiated between the Congress and the witnesses themselves. This wasn't like a subpoena issue where Congress said, okay, we require you to show up and swear to tell the whole truth. This was please come here and talk to us about this. So my question is, who was invited, and then what were the negotiations like? And if it was indeed the case that Tether and Brian Armstrong were invited and they did not show up, then to your point, yeah, that will probably not look good to the members of Congress who really wanted them to come in and talk about what they're doing.